So just a little bit about myself. So as Nathan said, I'm Anna Boyd. I'm the genetics operations specialist, a bit of a tongue twister, for beef and lamb genetics, which is great because I just have to think about beef alone and don't even have to spare a thought for sheep. So I grew up on Halden Station. So Halden's a 22,000 hectare station on the northern shores of Lake Benmore. We run a fully recorded Hereford and Angus herd. So this year we're roughly calving 370 Hereford and 150 Angus. We also run merino and half-bred sheep and red deer. So I didn't go to Lincoln like most of my peers. I went to the University of Otago and studied a Bachelor of Science in Zoology. My first real job was a research technician at Ag Research Inverness, and then I took a role up here with Beef and Lamb New Zealand first, actually, and that was as the Northern South Island Extension Manager. So I was that for, I think, 2 years or 3 years, and then I took the role, my current role, with Beef and Lamb Genetics. Today I'm going to talk about the Beef and Lamb New Zealand Genetics Dairy Beef Progeny Test. So the first mating of this took place in 2015. We currently have 6 cohorts of calves on the ground. So we've just recently had our 6th born in the last couple of months. So in a moment, I'll talk about the different cohorts, but at the beginning, it was at Limestone Downs. So this was just out of Port Waikato. And then it moved to Wairaki Pastoral, that is just north of Taupo. So recorded beef bulls are nominated by breeders, and then we have a panel that selects the successful bulls that are put into the mating that year. And last year, when we started our collaboration with LIC in 2020, to try to make that pathway for breeders a little bit easier into that dairy beef market, but then also make that semen more readily available to dairy farmers, and good semen at that. So Limestone Downs was the first mating, as I just mentioned, and also the second cohort of calves were born there. So 2016 and 2017 born. So all progeny have been processed from Limestone, and the analysis of this was reported in our last report that was put out to industry in June of this year. So they were predominantly 800 Friesian and crossbred cows, and then which were artificially inseminated or artificially bred, and then 150 to 220 heifers were naturally mated, but this was to Angus and Hereford sires only. So in terms of those crossbred cows as well for the dairy farmers, they were predominantly Holstein Friesian, but then there were also some Holstein Friesian cross Jersey. So the purpose of the Limestone Downs was to get a range of EBVs tested to determine how well the progeny performance matched the EBV of the sire. It was to demonstrate that you can successfully use beef bulls in a dairy and dairy beef finishing system. We wanted to compare the impact on heifer mating between an easy calving beef bull versus a Jersey bull. And we also wanted to assess value added by selection of high merit recorded beef bulls. In terms of the EBVs, within each breed, so within the Hereford and the Angus, a spread of birth weight, gestation length, and live weight at 600 was achieved. But just keeping in mind too that, we obviously didn't want to cause any major calving issues. So in terms of the birth weight EBV, this was restricted to the lightest 50% of each breed, just to try to prevent those difficulties. When similar sires were available in terms of being nominated, we did try to choose those with superior carcass traits, specifically eye muscle area and IMF. So in terms of Limestone Downs, there were 31 Angus and 34 Hereford bulls analysed. Just on a note, in terms of what we found with EBVs as well, and this is we've found this in the beef progeny test too, is that breed plan EBVs did predict progeny performance of the beef cross dairy cattle. This was particularly true for calving and growth traits, except for the 200-day weight. And this is because, obviously in a dairy beef environment, it was days to weaning rather than that set age at weaning. And the relationship was still there, in terms of the carcass, but it was just not as strong in terms of those EBVs. In terms of the impact on the heifers mating, they milked the same, they got back and calved the same, but obviously we did have to pull a few more calves than normal. Then we made the move to Waireki Pastoral. So this is a Pāmu-owned enterprise or property, and this is where we are currently still mating. So cohorts 3 to 6, and as I mentioned earlier, we've just had the 2021 born land on the ground. So in terms of the bulls that we select as well, we normally select 21 nominated sires every year. We did select 22 this year. As of January 2022, when we get our first lot of data back in on this current cohort, so that will be gestation length, it'll be birth weight, it'll be that 200-day weight, or the days to weaning, we would have analysed 17 different beef breeds. So Waireki Pastoral is open to all beef breeds, but we do obviously still put a performance and emphasis on recorded beef bulls. So 1,400 to 1,600 crossbred cows are AI'd every year to nominated beef bulls, open to all breeds. So Waireki Pastoral, so we calve on Renown, and then we move to Orokonui, which is where the progeny are taken through to finishing. So we kind of shifted from that purpose of proving EBV's work in a dairy beef environment, proving that we can safely use a beef bull, proving that we're not going to cost a dairy farmer too much in terms of days of milk. We aren't going to make them have to pull every second cow. When we moved to Waireki, we're more about identifying and proving beef bulls that have short gestation length, are easy calving, have excellent growth rates and superior carcass traits, and are suitable for widespread use in the dairy industry. And as I mentioned earlier, we've gone on board with LIC to ensure that the beef semen choice of dairy farmers will produce calves that perform at all stages of the supply chain. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a rundown of what we measure on farm. So at Renown, at the dairy farm there, the calves are weighed at birth. They are DNA sampled. Assistances are recorded. Just to also mention as well, the dead calves are also weighed, and then they're weaned at a set weight with the date recorded that they reached that target weight. They're then shifted to Orokonui, which is where they're split into 4 groups by sex, weight, and sire, so that sires are equally represented across those groups. We measure a 400-day weight, a 600-day weight, a pre-slaughter weight, and then they're obviously shipped to be processed. And this is where we grab the ultrasound scan for EMA. We actually ultrasound on farm too, and we do the EMA, rib and rump fat, and IMF. And then when they are processed, we grab the carcass and beef EQ data through Silverfern Farms. So just a little couple of numbers for you in terms of average day. So average day at scanning, or average age at scanning, should I say, was 825 days. Average age at slaughter for the last cohort that have been processed, that were the 2018 born, was 870 days. So results so far, this is where we get into the exciting stuff that hopefully many of you will be interested in. I do want to just point out that the numbers here are expressed as the mean or average of a size progeny. So that's the mean or average. So the gestation length sire mean range was 13.5 days. And this is of the 125 bulls that have been tested between 2016 and 2020. The 282-day average was comparable to Jersey bulls, but you also had that range. So the progeny of the sire that had the shortest gestation length on average of its progeny was shaved off 6 days off the dairy average. But then you also had a sire that was 7 days over as well. In terms of the birth weight, we had a 33 kg to 45 kg mean birth weight range among sires. The overall average amongst all sires was again comparable to Jersey bulls. I do want to make a wee note on that high kind of weight there, just because I know a couple of people probably blinking a few times at that 45 kgs. So I did want to note that the 16 of the 17 bulls with an average birth weight above or over 40 kgs was actually at Limestone Downs when we weren't as restrictive on those EBVs. And then we obviously had no significant calving difficulty caused in dairy cows. So less than 1% is comparable to the use of Jersey bulls. This was, as I mentioned earlier, higher in the heifers used at Limestone. Of the 2020 born, only 6 assisted calvings, all of which involved a male-presented calf. Then we shift to the growth and carcass traits. So again, the progeny mean 600-day weight range of 68 kgs. The majority progeny processed graded the P2, so the 16-17 born, that was 90-70%. And then the recent cohort we just processed from Renown or Orokonui was 97.6. All traits assessed in live animals have shown a significant impact of sire, and only 2 carcass traits, pH and meat colour, were not affected by sire. I also just wanted to just give you a little bit of an indication about how many of the progeny reached the reserve grade. So of the 18 born, 38% of heifers and 24% of steers processed reached that reserve grade. So kind of what I wanted to emphasize with the last 2 slides in particular is that a huge pool of bulls available, there is a huge pool of bulls available that can be safely used over dairy cows and offer an improvement in gestation length and calf value. So here is just a little bit of a graph representation of the numbers I just gave you with that range. So obviously on the horizontal axis there we have the progeny mean birth weight, and it had that range that I just showed you earlier of, you know, like 33 to 45. And then on your vertical axis, you've got the progeny mean 600-day weight. But what I really wanted to emphasize in this graph was that just because a calf is born heavier does not necessarily mean they will be the heaviest at your future growth rates or growth measurement when you take those measurements. So when you have a look at this graph, you've got calves that were born at that 35 to 36 kgs. There's a 47 kg range in there at that 600 day. When you look at the calves that were born at that 39 to 40, there is a 60 kg range. So again, just because a calf is born heavy does not necessarily mean that this calf will be the heaviest at 600 days. As a dairy farmer, you can buy semen from a beef bull that hits that tight gestation length and birth weight specs, but also add value to the rearer and finisher by having average to above average EBVs for growth. Then we look at this kind of cool graph here with the dairy beef progeny test marbling score. So this is the Meat Standards Australia grading system. So the MSA score is on the vertical axis there. So a score of 300 is equal to a marble score of 1. The score there is a 0 to 9 when they actually do that within the plant. So what I wanted to show you on this graph, and it might be a little bit small, but obviously in this graph, there's a lot of Angus and Hereford represented because it only has the 3 lots of cohorts that have been processed so far. But what I wanted to emphasize was the fact that, yes, there might be quite a few Angus sires that are at the top there in terms of having the highest average marbling score, but there's also Angus down the bottom of that graph with the lowest average marbling score. And then when you look at Herefords, you know, the Herefords aren't as renowned for marbling, but if you choose the right bull based on EBVs, you can get a Hereford that can marble as well as an Angus. Obviously, as we move through the years and we process more of these breeds, we'll get the more colours in there, so we'll be able to compare the multiple breeds. And this kind of leads on really nicely to my last slide. So this is a table that was included in the most recent dairy beef progeny test report, again published in June of this year. So the ideal bull for a dairy farmer must produce a calf that is born easily, and on time, a calf that must grow quickly to processing, producing a good level of fatness in the carcass. So when we take into account all of those factors, there are 11 bulls represented in this table. So the criteria we use for this table: birth weight less than 40 kgs, gestation length no more than 282 days, carcass weight and marbling score above average. But again, what I wanted to emphasize with this table, it's not necessarily about the individuals that are in this. It's about the fact that there is 5 breeds represented in those 11 bulls. So it demonstrates that you can find a good bull in whatever breed you want, so you don't have to change your breed preferences to improve performance. And that is me. And so, yeah, just a few acknowledgements there. Obviously, LIC, Rebecca Hickson, so she's the science project lead. So she does all the nitty gritty for me. And then I also wanted to mention Craig from BreedTech, who does a lot of my operational work as well. So thank you.